What is our common bond truly? Freedom!
I hereby declare this to be an unlawful assembly. I order all those assembled to immediately disperse. If you do not disperse, you may be arrested and/or subject to other police action. Other police action may include actual physical removal, the use of riot control agents and/or less lethal munitions, which could cause risk of injury to those who remain.
Freedom! Because that's what it's all about, and it's the only thing that it's all about, nothing else.
Hello world, we are anonymous. A man by the name of William Cooper died shortly after the 9/11 catastrophe. It was a catastrophe that has led to the current state of affairs that we are witnessing today. With the war front on all sides, from invading states in the name of liberal democracy, to the recent state of emergency declared on hackers, the world is invariably changing with dramatic speed. William Cooper tried to warn us about the nature of these events through his radio programs, his writing, and his investigation. Cooper was a member of the Naval Intelligence when he was but a young man, and was reared in a military family. He lived on bases with his father for most of his adolescent life. Shortly after, he was run off the road in an accident that resulted in the amputation of his leg. The people responsible even visited him in the hospital, warning him to keep quiet. It was then that Cooper realized that he had to protect himself if he was to uncover the truth, a truth that he suspected existed within government facilities. To government cover-ups and from hidden cancer cures to terrorist attacks, he understood the risks this entailed. In the late 1990s, after establishing Citizens Agency for Joint Intelligence, at one point the largest global civilian intelligence gathering organization in the world, the government began harassing Cooper by any means they could: tax evasion and bank fraud, accusations that were never substantiated. In contrast, banks gave William Cooper a glowing report: he paid his bills early and had no debts. But, eventually, Cooper was forced to send his wife and family into hiding as he fought the trumped-up charges. President Clinton, at the time, placed him on the Filegate list, a list of people who were deemed a threat, a list that involved questionable surveillance on these threats. On the November 6, 2001, a confrontation occurred between William Cooper and law enforcement agents. These men had supposedly disguised themselves as rowdy teenagers, and used this ruse to lure him from his house. William Cooper was then shot dead, allegedly because he was part of a militant anti-establishment movement. The occurrences of that chaotic day are still unclear, but his body was left on the doorstep for 15 hours, with no medical attention or intervention provided, and no cameras or recordings made of the unfolding events that led up to his death. Months before his death, his radio program had broadcast that there was a high likelihood of a terrorist attack on American shores, possibly involving Osama bin Laden, who would be portrayed as the next Saddam Hussein by the government. He predicted the reactions to the attack, the risk of a police state. When he was dared to give a timeline, he stated that the attack would occur on his June 28, 2001 program. He stated that it was only weeks away from happening in his opinion. Just weeks after September 11, and months after his striking predictions, William Cooper was shot dead at his residence.
My purpose is not to change your religion. My purpose is not to make you believe everything that I say. On the contrary, I'm the only one in the world that will tell you, listen to everyone, read everything, believe absolutely nobody, including me, including your mother, including your pastor, your preacher, your priest, your Uncle Bob, and anybody else that you can think of, unless you can prove it in your own research. And research, it doesn't mean getting a book off the library shelf and reading it and saying, well, he said it, so it must be true, because I wrote a book, you see. And I'm telling you, don't believe me unless in your own research you can prove what it is that I'm telling you. Because this is the age of deception. And if you don't believe that, you might as well go home right now, because you're in the wrong place. This is the age of deception. And everybody today is living in a fantasy world, and they're promoting agendas that they don't understand because somebody has told them that it's the right thing to do, and they generally believe it. Most people go to the church that they go to simply because their parents did, and for no other reason. Most people who are Democrats because their parents were, or they're Republicans because their parents were. If you ask them, what is a Republican? They couldn't tell you in 100 million years. They don't know. They vote that way because that's comfortable for them, because that's what they grew up with. Most of us do what we do because we grew up in it. So there is an awful lot about this environment around you shapes who and what you are. It's the truth. I had a woman at the post office where we live the other day say, I listen to your radio station every day. It's wonderful. But when Bill's show comes on, I turn it off because I don't want to be brainwashed. What is she admitting to? She's admitting that she's already been brainwashed because she is unwilling to listen to opposing viewpoints. That's the biggest #1 sign of brainwashing that there is. It didn't matter that it was my show. It's any show. Any opposing viewpoint. Anything that opposes the status quo, if you won't listen to it, you're already brainwashed. You have closed your mind, and you are at the mercy of whatever manipulation they want to throw your way, because you've already determined that they're telling you the truth no matter what. You don't investigate. You have accepted blindly. That's the most dangerous thing that can happen to anyone. The moment that you say, this guy right here, I like him. I like what he says. He's right. I'm going to listen to him. And anybody that says anything different to him is wrong. You've just totally destroyed yourself. Because the truth is, he's a human being. I'm a human being. This young lady is a human being. Bill Clinton is a human being. Okay? When you mistake people for righteousness, or when you mistake people for the message, or when you mistake people for government, or when you mistake people for religion, you're making a big mistake. Because people, for the most part, are a big mistake. Does everybody understand what I'm trying to tell you? We are subject to temptations. We are subject to our own carnal desires, lusts, and well, I could probably go through a list of about 500 things that can make an average, normal, good-thinking, good-doing person for most of the time, at some point in their life, do something that's absolutely terrible. Most of us are here and not in jail because most of us, when we did whatever it was that was so terrible in our life already, and everybody here, without exception, has done something like that, we got away with it, didn't we? Okay. The concept that imperfect men can rule imperfect men is absolutely ludicrous. The concept that you can give someone power and they're not going to abuse that power is also ludicrous. It is wrong for us to ever get into that kind of thinking. And the more power you give someone, the more opportunity they have to abuse or misuse that power. And the easier it is to fall into temptation for them. Now, I got to tell most of you right now, I don't like Clinton any more than you do, but it's wrong. It is absolutely wrong of us to judge Clinton. Now, I'm going to talk about this country and what it's all about. Some of you are going to disagree with me. And during this talk today and tomorrow, I'm going to make some of you angry. And I want you to understand this. If what I'm telling you up here is not true, it's not going to bother you. You're a rapist. Did that bother anybody in here? Anybody get bothered by that? No. You know why? Because there's no rapists in here. If I said, you're a rapist, and somebody got up and started yelling at me and ran out the door, you'd know I hit somebody, wouldn't you? Okay. On my radio show, I use the term sheeple a lot. I can always tell when I hit the targets, boy, I get the letters. How dare you call me a sheeple? That person wouldn't have wrote that letter if that person wasn't a sheeple. Because they would have known I wasn't talking about them, right? Only the person that the arrow hits gets angry. So the reason I'm telling you this, if you find what I'm talking about disturbing, I'm hitting you with some truth that is bothering you. That's really bothering you, and you need to look at it really closely. Because it wouldn't be bothering you if it wasn't true. If it wasn't pinging on you personally with something that you know inside of you is not right, it's not going to upset you. And that's the truth. Okay. He who does not study and understand history is doomed to repeat it. And the same play has been being performed throughout the history of the world by what we call the builders, the controllers, the puppet masters, whatever you want to call them. And I'm going to start right at the beginning and tell you exactly who they are and how to identify them. Okay? Because there really are puppet masters. There really are controllers. There really are builders, but they're not engaged in building buildings. They're engaged in building people. They're building what they call the perfect race. They're perfecting humanity in order to control nature. They're building the utopian world that they perceive that we need. I say, who's we? We who? You didn't ask me about this. You know? And that's the problem with these guys. They have placed themselves in an elitist attitude to tell the rest of us what we need. And the truth is, we don't need them to do that. Okay? They haven't got the right to do that. They think they do, because they think we're just a bunch of stupid cattle. And I got to tell you, for the most part, most people prove them right all the time. Not intentionally, but because the knowledge, the truth has been withheld from the people. And that's how they manipulate people, is by withholding the truth and controlling them with the lies. Okay? Now, first I got to start off here. I got to ask you a question. What's the most important thing about this country that you can think of? And I want to see some hands and hear some answers. This is a participation sport when you come in here with me. Okay? Yes, sir.
Recognition of God-given rights.
Recognition of God-given rights. Okay?
Individual liberty.
Individual liberty. Freedom.
No king but King Jesus.
No king but King Jesus.
Sound money.
Sound money. Okay, now I'm going to ask you another question. Which one of those, because somebody already gave the right answer, which one of those do you think is the right answer? Everybody all at once.
Freedom.
Freedom. Why? Because none of the rest of them would exist without it. You couldn't have any of the rest of them without the freedom to do it. You give somebody the power to say you can't have one king but King Jesus, and you're not going to have King Jesus, you're not going to have Christianity, you're not going to have a church. In fact, if they catch you saying the word Jesus, they're liable to chop your head off and throw your body to the lions. Isn't that correct? Okay. The greatest thing about this country, whether you agree with me or not, it's the absolute truth. If you take this away from any person or any group of people, you have no country. Freedom. You have no religion. You have no sound money. You don't have any of it. You're subject to the control of the people who have taken your freedom away and who are now subjecting you to their will, because that's what lack of freedom is. Being subject. You know what subject means? To someone else's will. Freedom means you're subject to your own will. As long as what? As long as you take responsibility for your actions and you never hurt the person or property of any other human being. Period. If you do, you put yourself at war with someone else. Is that freedom? No. Then you're taking someone else's freedom away. You have become the bad guy when you do that. How many of you have heard of Dave Emery? Talk show host. KGO, San Francisco. Anybody? The other day he called me that famous fascist. Do I sound like a fascist? No. But you see, that's part of the manipulation. Because
He has a one-track mind.
Pardon?
He has a one-track mind.
No, he has an agenda, is what he has.
One-track mind, the way he thinks.
Yeah. He's not really thinking, he's fulfilling an agenda. He has an agenda, he's a socialist. He doesn't want people to listen to me who tell you that freedom is the most important thing in the world, because socialism can't have people walking around saying things like that. Because socialism doesn't give you freedom. They want you to think it does. Aren't they trying to bombard you with the delusion that liberals are for freedom? Liberals are for socialism. Liberals started out being for freedom when there wasn't any. Being for freedom was liberal. Being conservative was for the power of the king. Remember? All of our founding fathers were liberals. Believe it. They were also traitors. So when somebody calls me a traitor because I'm supposedly against the government, it doesn't bother me. I'm in damn good company. But you see, I'm not a traitor. Because what is the government? We are not the government. No, we're not even supposed to be. What is the government? The government is a contract signed by the founding fathers, which is called the Constitution for the United States of America. That is the government. That says what the government can do, what the government cannot do, when it can do it, when it cannot do it, where it can do it, where it cannot do it. Are you parties to that contract? Huh?
Nope.
No, you're not. How can you be party to a contract you didn't sign? You can't be. So it's a contract entered into between the signatories representing the first 13 colonies in order to establish a union of independent sovereign states for their mutual benefit and protection. Correct? Am I right? Only those who signed it and those whom they legally and lawfully represented are really bound to it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
No. Now, don't get into all this posterity stuff, because posterity is only bound to it if they want to be. How do you get bound to it? You're in a territory which wants to become a state, and by vote you agree to become bound to it and are accepted as a state of the Union. You understand that? Okay. Why? Because you elected representatives to act in your behalf. Is that correct? Okay. Is that a democracy? No. Is this a democratic country? No. Was it ever meant to be? No, never. So why do we hear all this talk about democracy all the time? It's the agenda to brainwash the American populace into accepting democracy, which is what? The first step into socialism. Why? No, because in our human failings and in our temptations, if it's one man, one vote, the majority is going to vote themselves everything, right? And if you vote yourself everything, what is that? The state owes me a job. We're going to vote that the state has to give us all a job. We're going to vote that the state is responsible for making sure that I have X number of dollars a year, so we're going to vote that there's going to be a minimum income for everybody in the country. That's socialism. Lenin, V.I. Lenin, you all know who he is? The man who founded the Soviet Union? V.I. Lenin said, democracy is indispensable to socialism. You can take a free people, make them into a democracy from whatever they were before, and they will vote themselves into slavery every single time because they are weak. They want the benefits. They want the check from the government. They want the job from the government. They want a car from the government. They want medical care from the government. They want everything from the government. What's the fallacy in that? The government doesn't have anything to give you unless they first take it away from you. Right? Now, for somebody who works and is productive, they don't like that. That's not good, is it? Somebody, however, who is a weak victim, that's great, isn't it? Because they don't have to do anything anymore, do they? They can just sit back and be provided for. Have you noticed all across the country right now, they are creating victim classes of people? Why do you think that is? Because victims need care. Once you create a victim that needs care, you have another vote for socialism, don't you? Most of it is a scam. When I grew up as a boy, I lived all over the world. I remember one period of time when I was in junior high. That's 7th and 8th grade. I lived in Midwest City, which is right outside of Oklahoma City. I went to Midwest City Monroney Junior High School, which had just been built. We were the first students in that school. Nobody locked their doors. I never knew a girl that got pregnant. Never, ever, not once. Never knew anybody who was divorced. Never knew anybody whose home was robbed. I had my bicycle tire cut one time by a kid who didn't like me. Big deal. You know, what's that? $3 for a new tire. And of course I bloodied his nose. We both got whipped by our parents. Him for slitting my bicycle tire, me for bloodying his nose. I didn't care. He didn't care either. We lived in a different world than we live in today. Everybody earned a living. Everybody who wanted to work had a job. I don't care who it was. And the only thing that could hold them back would be the lack of an education, which was available to everybody, except in some extreme rural areas of this country where there really was poverty, lack of education, and inability to get good work because they didn't have that education. Now you see people coming in this country complaining about these things that have no legitimate complaint. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not pinging on immigrants, because if I lived in a place that was so terrible I couldn't support my family or put a roof over my head or even find a toilet to go to the bathroom, I would be coming across this border just as quick as they are. You can't fault them for that. It's illegal. You can fault the government for allowing it to happen because it's illegal, it's unlawful. And they're always talking about we got to follow the law. Truth is, we only have to follow the law that they think is okay. Why do they want these people coming across our borders? Because these people are helpless. They're without money, they're without a home, they're without a job. What are they? Victims. What do victims bring? Give them the vote and you're going to have socialism. That's why they don't try to stem the flood of immigration. It furthers the agenda of socialism. I feel sorry for those people. They're being used. And their only thought is to find a good place where they can have a good life for themselves and their children. They're being used and abused, and they all become good little Democrats. They all vote socialist, and they all want their handouts from under Uncle Sam. There are some who came into this country many years ago of many different nationalities who have learned the American way, are good Americans, are not immigrants. They are Americans, and they've established and have a sound place in this country. They're part of it. But they're being used. They can't speak the language. Because they can't speak the language, it's hard to find a job. When they find a job, it's not at the pay that they would like to have. So they look to the government to solve their problems. Does everybody understand what I'm telling you? You've often wondered, why is it that they don't do anything about this flood of immigrants coming across the border? And I'm not talking about just Hispanics from Mexico, Central and South America. I'm talking about from all over the world. They come here for a better life, not realizing that in coming here and being manipulated and used as they are, they're going to destroy all of their chances forever having the American dream. They're going to help bring about socialism, which will put them back into slavery again. And that's got to stop. You have to understand the agenda. You have to understand who's bringing it about and why before you can see the manipulations and how people are being used and manipulated to bring it about. No, what is the government? It's the Constitution for the United States of America, the Bill of Rights, and the amendments lawfully made thereto. You see, you're mistaking people for the government. The founders of this country, by and large, were Christian. Many of them weren't Christian, but pretended to be, were deists, and you can find that in their writings. Many of them were members of the secret societies. How many of you believe Thomas Jefferson was a Christian? I'm not afraid. I believed it until I read the truth about Thomas Jefferson and studied his life. Thomas Jefferson hated Christianity. Thomas Jefferson tore up the Bible. Thomas Jefferson wrote his own Bible because he said the God of the universe could not possibly be that terrible God represented in the King James Version of the Bible. Don't be afraid to raise your hand in here, folks. Nothing that I'm going to say is intended as a personal slant or insult or attack upon anybody in here. But I need your cooperation in order for us all to learn. Until I really studied Thomas Jefferson and found out what he really was. He was a deist. So was Benjamin Franklin. How many of you knew that Benjamin Franklin was the master of the Masonic Lodge in Philadelphia? How many of you knew that he was the master of the Lodge of Nine Muses in France? Have you ever studied the Lodge of Nine Muses? Boy, you better. How many of you knew that when Benjamin Franklin was in the colonies, he pretended to be a pious Christian, although he was not seen in church too much. Pretended to be a pious Christian. However, he entered into a sexual relationship and a living arrangement with two different women and sired children by both of them, never married either one. How many of you knew that? How many of you knew that when Benjamin Franklin went to France, he surrounded himself with prostitutes and drank champagne almost 24 hours a day and just reveled in orgies? How many of you knew that? You'd be surprised what some ugly old men are capable of. See, these are things you don't know because you were taught something different, and it makes you uncomfortable to hear what I'm telling you, only for the reason that you've been taught something else and you've been reared with it and you've accepted it. It's hard to let go of something that you have learned and accepted that is not true. You don't want to let go of it because then you have to give up your comfort zone. How many of you know that George Washington was a Freemason? How many of you know if you're a Freemason, you cannot possibly in your wildest dreams be a Christian? It's absolutely impossible. And I can show it to you in their own words. So how could George Washington be a Christian? And you don't even know the slightest, teeniest bit about his real involvement in the secret societies. He founded a military order, a secret order of his military officers, the generals and senior officers of the Revolution. What's the name of that order? The Knights of Cincinnatus, also known as the Knights of the Golden Circle. What sprang out of the Knights of the Golden Circle many years later? The Ku Klux Klan. How many of you knew that? No, see, you don't know these things because you're so willing to accept that what you know is right without investigating. And until you break out of that mold, I'm going to tell you right now, you're never going to know anything about the truth of this country, who founded it and why, and where it's going, what's happening today, and what the consequences are going to be for us down the line. You see, all of this has happened over and over and over and over and over again throughout the history of the human race. These people know how to lead us wherever they want us to go because they study history and we don't. What was Rome? What was Rome? A republic? What kind of republic? A constitutional republic. They had a constitution. Did you know that? It was a republic. Did you know that? What happened to Rome? It fell into oligarchy, and then into dictatorship, then into rampant immorality, and socialism declined, fell, and became the Vatican. Anybody here doubt that? I can prove every word of it. The Roman Empire never fell. It changed its name. The emperor became the Pope. This is the truth. The old pantheon of Roman gods became the pantheon of saints, and they are identical in name and everything else. Now, I'm not trying to hurt Catholics. I'm not saying that you belong to the wrong religion. I'm not telling you to change your religion. I believe in freedom. I'll fight for you to be a Catholic or a Buddhist or a Baptist or whatever you want to be. But when you come to talk to me, I'm going to tell you the truth about all of it, whether you want to hear it or not. And the only way to escape that is to get away from me. Okay? We are all manipulated. All of us. Do you have the freedom to choose your religion? Can you have a country that is Christian and have freedom? No. What if in 100 years the majority of the population changes their religion to Buddhist? Now, what kind of country is it? You can't assign a religion to a country. A country doesn't exist except on paper and in your mind. The religion belongs to the people. Does everybody understand that? Let me show you something here. How many of you have seen this? What is that? Where have you seen it? Pardon? On your book. Where have you seen that? Jehovah's Witnesses, that's true. Where else? How many of you watch Pat Robertson? You don't recognize that? He had that for a long time. It's the symbol of what great Christian broadcasting network? Who's on TVN? Huh? What does it mean? This is the marriage of church and state. Is that what you want? What happened the last time you had the marriage of church and state? Anybody who disagreed got what? Burned at the cross, placed on the rack, chopped into pieces, tortured, murdered, burned. Now don't get me wrong, I believe in freedom. If that's what you want, you're entitled to want that all you want. But I got to tell you, you try to bring this into being and I'll fight you with everything I've got. Because I don't believe in burning people at the stake. I don't believe in placing them on the rack. And I am a Christian. I don't believe in persecuting Jews because they're Jews, because they killed Jesus Christ, because I guarantee you there's not a Jew living on the face of this earth today that even knew Jesus Christ, much less killed him. That's what's called what? Corruption of blood. Our Constitution forbids corruption of blood, doesn't it? Because it's wrong. By the same token, I don't like Jews who say we're the chosen race and the rest of you are a bunch of stupid cattle and we're going to rule the world someday. You know what I say to them? Not if I can help it. Because why? Because it's this. Only it has a Star of David instead of a cross in the crown. Is that what you want? You see, that's democracy. When you have enough people who believe like you do to force your will upon everyone else, you become the bad guy. What does freedom say? What is freedom? The right to choose. As long as I don't hurt the person or property of any other human being, I can believe what I want, go to whatever church I want, be whatever I want, read whatever book I want, do whatever I wish, and do it abundantly and with prosperity. And without freedom, I couldn't do any of it, neither can you. When you ask for this, you're asking for enslavement. And right now, you might be the slave master, but who's going to be in charge 50 years from now? That's the uncertainty about these things. You might be on top now, but just wait a little while. It never fails. If you study the history of the world, you'll find whoever the oppressed is today will be the master tomorrow. A lot of what's happening in the world today is because this happened yesterday. Make no mistake about it, everything that is happening in the world today is because of race and religion, and the persecution caused by those two different things throughout the history of the world. Is everybody up with me? I know that some of you don't agree with me. That's okay. I'm not telling you you have to. But I want you to go out of here thinking about these things and think about what is it that you really want. You want to be free so that you can be what you want to be and worship where you want to worship? Or do you want to cause a situation whereby you're in charge so that you can force your will upon everybody else so that they'll get pissed off enough to overthrow you and do the same thing to you? Because that's exactly what that brings about. Exactly, it's never failed. Study history, you'll see. It's the truth. So, gee, if our founding fathers were deists and they were members of the secret societies, and some of them were masquerading as Christians, and some of them were just flat weren't Christians, weren't masquerading at all, why did they create this country? They came here to create a new world, not a country. How many of you really read what they wrote? They didn't come here to create a country. They came here to create a new world. What did they call it? They called it the New World, didn't they? What else did they call it? the grand experiment, the great experiment. Remember reading those words? And just read right over them, didn't really understand what it meant. They came from a world that was oppressive, ruled by kings and queens and popes and prelates and bishops and lords and barons, who just because they didn't like the way you looked could chop you into quarters and throw you to the pigs if they wanted to, anytime they wanted to. And if you didn't believe the religion they wanted you to believe in, they'd burn you at the stake or torture you. In some way, make your life absolutely miserable. They came here to create a new world, free from all of that. But they knew that they could not be safe in the new world if the old world was the way that it was. How do you get rid of kings and queens and barons and lords and emperors and prelates and sultans and emirs? How do you do that? That's exactly right. A new world order. From the beginning, that was the goal, ladies and gentlemen. That's the absolute truth. From the very beginning, that was the goal. What do you think New World means? What do you think it means? So they did something that was unheard of, never been done in the history of the world. They set the cattle free. They said, you're not really a serf. You're not really a slave. You're not really as dumb as they say you are. You're not really a bunch of cattle. Now you're free men. You got brains. We're even going to write this contract to guarantee your freedom. But we know you won't keep it because you're human. And they wrote about that, didn't they? Didn't they tell us all the ways that we would give it up? Didn't they write about it? Didn't they warn us over and over and over and over again in all of their writings? They knew we would give it up because we're human, and they were geniuses who understood human nature probably better than any single group of men that's ever lived throughout the history of the world. They understood it perfectly. What did Ben Franklin say when he came out of the Constitutional Convention after everything was signed, sealed, and delivered? Somebody said, "Hey, Ben, what have ye wrought?" See? A republic, if you can keep it. He knew. They all knew. What was it really about? Why did they give it to us if they knew we would give it up? And they did know. Make no mistake about that. They knew. What do you think the fight over federalism was all about? They wanted to make sure that at some future point, the great central government would seize control. And they even pretended to fight over this. Like all of these secret society people do. It's called the Hegelian dialectic. We want all these people to do something. So you and I are going to get together. We're going to create two different causes. We're going to get all these people wrapped up in it. We're going to pretend to fight against each other. And this fight is going to bring about the conclusion that we really wanted in the first place. And they're all going to think that it was done accidentally by them, and we didn't have anything to do with it. How many of you understand the concept of Hegelian dialectic of manipulation of political resolution? If you don't, you'd better read Hegel and you'd better study it, because that's what's happening. That's what the abortion issue is all about. Can government decide the abortion issue? Can you decide it with laws? If you could, everybody would obey the law, there wouldn't be any issue, would there? The Supreme Court has already made the law, haven't they?
Thank you. I've been saying that for 20 years.
It's the truth. The whole issue is designed to create a conflict which cannot be solved except by some world body. And by the way, if you want confirmation of what I said about the Founding Fathers, if you really believe that they were Christian, go look at the city that they laid out from the air. Look at the symbolism that they built into it. All deist, all Masonic, all Jacobin. It's another word for Jacobin, Illuminist, Illuminati. Go into the Capitol building, stand right in the center of the rotunda and look straight up at the dome where nobody ever looks. And what do you see? You see the apotheosis of George Washington, riding across the heavens in the chariot of Apollo. Who is Apollo? George Washington. He's become God now. And around the perimeter of the Capitol dome, you see all the old gods of the Roman pantheon. They're all there. Zeus, Mercury, Prometheus, all of them. What's that doing on the inside of our Capitol dome if this country is a Christian nation? Can you tell me that? No. And you never will be able to in a million years unless you turn around and admit the truth. The truth is it never was intended to be. The people in government for many years have been Christian. Are they now? Most of the people in our government now are not Christian, and that's part of the problem today. They have no morals, no ethical standards of behavior, and therefore anything goes. They're a pack of pathetic chronic liars, which is the sign of a socialist every single time. Socialism believes in what? The supremacy of the mind of man, not in God. Anytime man has supremacy over everything, everything becomes what? Subjective. If you're God, how can you do something wrong? And that's the whole problem with this crowd now. They don't have anybody to answer to. You see, whether you believe in God or not, the human race must have God. They must have a superior power to which they must answer. If they do not, then everything becomes subjective. And if I want to slice your head in half, by God, there's nothing wrong with me doing it because I'm God. You understand that? That's really what's wrong. When man has nothing or no one to answer to, man can do no wrong, can he? And by the way, when you hear politicians and talk show hosts and newspaper reporters using that term masses, those are Marxist, socialist speaking Americans. Never use that term. Americans say the people, the American people. My fellow Americans. Only a Marxist, socialist, or a communist will use the term masses. And you're hearing that on talk radio and in the media all across the country all the time, and on television, even Dan Rather uses that term. Dan would rather be read. There is only one uniting common bond amongst all Americans. What is it? Freedom. If that isn't the most important thing in your life, you're not going to do a thing to help us save this country. In fact, more than likely, whatever you're going to do is going to help us destroy it. And I say us because it's the truth. If you want to really know what's wrong with this country, when you go home, go in your bathroom privately so nobody else can see you do it, close the door and look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. The truth is, what's wrong with this country is the American people have lost the knowledge and the motivation and the meaning of what it was all about to begin with. It was always about giving the common man freedom. Why? Because Folks, our founding fathers knew that if that would work, that would be the New World Order. If we could accept it and be responsible and hang on to it and make it work, that would be the New World Order. A direct result of it would be that giving the common man real freedom would topple every king and queen and sultan and emir off their thrones all around the world, and that's exactly what it did. Isn't that true? And they knew that they couldn't have any kind of a new world or new world order of any sort unless they got rid of the kings and queens and sultan and emirs and lords and barons. That's why they called this the grand experiment. Because that's what it was. If it would work, it would be the New World Order. If it wouldn't work, it would be whatever they thought that it should become. You know what they think it should become? You know what they're trying to make it now? A world totalitarian socialist government headed by a, quote, benevolent, unquote, dictatorship. They're going to present you with a Messiah. The whole world will accept this person as a Messiah. You can call him the Antichrist, whatever you want. I don't care. It's going to be the answer to all your problems. Worldwide. And the whole world is going to bow down to this person. Whether you believe in Christianity, the book of Revelations, or not, I'm telling you this is what's going to happen because I've talked to them face to face. And they don't even hide the fact. That person will wear the throne of the world. Behind that person will be a council of what they call wise men who will really be the rulers. This poor guy is just going to be the fool they stick out there to take the brunt of the public wrath whenever it's necessary. And you can knock him off if you want to. They just put somebody else up there. You don't have any choice, even if you vote. Because the choices that they give you to vote on all belong to them. Why do you think Charles Collins and Rosemary could not get in the debates? Could not get on ABC, NBC, the communist news networks, or any of the rest of them? Why do you think the American people were never shown them as a choice? Because you're not going to get a choice. They will put 2 or 3 up there for you to vote on. All belong to them. They'll even make it like they're really against each other. They'll make you believe it. They'll even throw you some trash about one of them, so maybe you won't vote for him thinking the election's fair because that's not a moral person. And then who do you put in the White House? The most immoral person that ever lived on this planet. Communist Clinton. You don't have a choice. That disappeared a long time ago. There's not a nickel's worth of difference between the Democratic and Republican Party, and hasn't been for an awful long time. And it doesn't matter which one is in the White House, we still go toward the New World Order, don't we? We still go more and more into socialism, don't we? But if they were truly different, that wouldn't happen, would it? So, I guess that, what time is it? Anybody got the time?
towers fall, the first of the fall. But here comes a man who came to save us all. The crown absorbs its power. Generations pass and it will never conform. I have my reasons to believe liberty and justice will be the same. A face of change and still just a dream. The mirror on the ruin behind the scenes. Like a ton of fucking eyes with the fucking lips. With the student to the drugs and the bottom of the head. They're trying to breathe so long the day is dead. There is a ring as the jumping of a love. Our work is just to stay down. So wrong is the will. Enemy. Watch your back.
We're all afraid of the dark inside ourselves.
They know when you are sleeping, they know when you're awake, they know if you've been good or bad. So they run to the lights at stake. Conspiracies around us. Your gut instinct tells you to run. The patterns are already collapsing. The final act is almost done. Conspiracies surround us. Your gut instinct tells you to run. The patterns are already collapsing. The final act is almost done. Take our bound. Turn anyone. Take off the line. Torture anyone. Give a fucking shot. We live by the sword and we shall die by it. From New York.